behind the palace gates, silence had become a weapon.
For months, the world watched and whispered, creating stories from shadows and building theories from fleeting glimpses. The Princess of Wales had vanished from public view, leaving behind only carefully crafted statements and a growing storm of speculation that threatened to consume everything she held dear. But silence, she had learned, was not protection, it was suffocation. The decision came at 3:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, when sleep refused to come and the weight of unspoken truths pressed against her chest like stones. She sat in her private study, surrounded by family photographs and the echoes of a life that had become a performance, and realized that the only way forward was through the very thing she had been avoiding, the complete, unvarnished truth. What she was about to reveal would shake the monarchy to its foundation, challenge everything the public thought they knew about royal life, and forever change the way the world saw the woman behind the title. This is the story of how the Princess of Wales found her voice and used it to rewrite the rules of an ancient institution. The morning Catherine chose to break her silence began like any other, with duty, protocol, and the careful choreography of royal life. She woke at 6:30, as she had every day for the past 15 years, to the sound of staff preparing for another day of managed appearances and measured words.
But something was different. Something had shifted in the quiet hours of the night. She stood at her bedroom window, watching the early morning mist curl around the ancient oak trees that had witnessed centuries of royal secrets. The grounds of Adelaide Cottage stretched before her, peaceful and private, one of the few places where she could still breathe without feeling the weight of 1,000 watching eyes. But even here, in this sanctuary she had fought to secure for her family, the walls felt like they were closing in. The past 8 months had been a masterclass in controlled communication. Every public statement had been vetted, revised, and polished until it gleamed with the kind of perfection that revealed nothing and satisfied no one. The official line was simple, clinical, almost boring in its brevity: the princess was recovering from planned abdominal surgery and would return to duties when medically cleared. But the public, hungry for truth and fed only carefully measured portions, had begun to feast on speculation instead. Social media had become a breeding ground for theories that ranged from the plausible to the absurd. Some claimed she was secretly getting divorced. Others insisted she was hiding a serious illness. The wildest theories suggested everything from plastic surgery gone wrong to a complete mental breakdown. Each day brought new hashtags, new amateur detective work, new pressure for answers that she wasn't allowed to give. Catherine had watched it all unfold from behind palace walls, feeling increasingly trapped by the very institution that was supposed to protect her. The royal machine, with its centuries-old protocols and modern media strategies, had wrapped her in a cocoon of silence that was supposed to be protective but felt more like a burial shroud. Her children had begun to notice. Charlotte, with her sharp 9-year-old perception, had asked why Mummy couldn't just tell everyone she was okay if she really was okay. George, carrying the weight of his future role even at 10, had started mimicking the careful, non-committal phrases he heard the adults use. Louis, bless him, remained blissfully unaware of the storm raging beyond their carefully maintained bubble, but even he had begun to ask why there were always photographers hiding in the bushes. William had been her anchor through it all, but she could see the strain in his eyes. He was caught between his role as her husband and his duty to the crown, walking a tightrope that grew thinner with each passing day. They had whispered conversations in the dark, planning strategies that never quite worked, crafting responses that never quite satisfied anyone. He wanted to protect her, but how do you protect someone from a prison made of protocol? The breaking point had come 3 days earlier, during a private meeting with senior palace officials. They sat around a mahogany table that had probably witnessed 1,000 such meetings, discussing her like she wasn't there. The communications team presented their latest strategy, a carefully orchestrated return to public duties, starting with a small, controlled engagement at a local charity. Every detail had been planned, from the color of her coat to the exact words she would use when inevitably asked about her absence. "We need to control the narrative," the press secretary had said, sliding a folder across the table. "These appearances will show the public that you're fully recovered and ready to resume your duties. We'll have friendly journalists, pre-approved questions, and a clear exit strategy if anything goes wrong." Catherine had stared at the folder, its contents representing everything she had come to despise about her life. Another performance, another carefully crafted illusion, another layer of distance between her true self and the world that claimed to love her. She thought about the thousands of letters from well-wishers who had sent genuine concern and support, who deserved better than calculated photo opportunities and scripted responses. What if I just told the truth, she had asked quietly. The silence that followed was deafening. The communications team exchanged glances, the kind that said they were dealing with a difficult client who didn't understand how things worked. The senior aide, a man who had spent 30 years managing royal crises, cleared his throat diplomatically. Ma'am, with respect, the truth is complicated. The public doesn't need to know every detail of your personal health situation. They need reassurance, stability, continuity. That's what the monarchy provides. But, that night, alone in her study with a cup of tea growing cold beside her, Catherine had realized that she wasn't just fighting for her own voice, she was fighting for the soul of an institution that claimed to serve the people while keeping them at arm's length. The monarchy's greatest strength, its mystique and carefully maintained distance, had become its greatest weakness in an age of social media and instant communication. She pulled out a legal pad and began to write, not the careful, measured words that would be edited and approved by committees, but the raw, honest truth that had been building inside her for months. She wrote about the fear, the isolation, the impossible pressure of being a symbol instead of a person. She wrote about watching her children learn to hide their feelings because showing them wasn't appropriate. She wrote about the weight of representing an institution that often seemed more concerned with its image than its people. The words came faster than they had in years, flowing like water through a broken dam. She wrote about the surgery, not the sanitized version the public had been given, but the reality of facing mortality while cameras waited outside the hospital. She wrote about the recovery that had been both physical and emotional, a time of reckoning with who she was versus who she was expected to be. Most importantly, she wrote about the decision that had been forming in her mind for weeks, the choice to step back from the traditional royal role and forge something new, something more authentic, something that honored both her duty and her humanity. As dawn broke over the estate, Catherine read through what she had written. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. It was her voice, unfiltered and unmanaged for the first time in years. She thought about the chaos it would cause, the meetings it would trigger, the careful plans it would destroy. She thought about William, who would stand by her but would also have to deal with the fallout. She thought about her children, who deserved a mother who showed them that authenticity was more valuable than approval. But, mostly, she thought about all the people who had sent letters and flowers, who had worried and wondered, who deserved better than the carefully constructed fiction that royal life had become. They deserved the truth, even if it wasn't pretty, even if it challenged their expectations, even if it changed everything. The decision crystallized in that moment, solid and unshakable. She would speak, not as the Princess of Wales, but as Catherine, mother, wife, woman, human being. She would tell her story in her own words, consequences be damned. She picked up her phone and scrolled through her contacts until she found the number she needed. The journalist answered on the third ring, groggy but alert when she realized who was calling. "I want to do an interview," Catherine said without preamble. "A real one. No pre-approved questions, no palace handlers, no script. Are you interested?" The silence that followed was brief but charged with possibility. "When?" the journalist asked. Catherine looked out at the morning sun breaking through the clouds, painting everything in golden light that seemed to promise new beginnings. "Today," she said. "I want to do it today." The phone call that would change everything lasted exactly 4 minutes and 37 seconds. Catherine had chosen Emma Morrison, a veteran journalist known for her integrity and her ability to ask tough questions without cruelty. Emma had covered the royal family for over a decade, but she had never received a call like this, a direct, unfiltered, and completely outside the usual channels. "You understand what this means?" Emma asked carefully. "If we do this properly, if you really tell your story, there's no going back. The palace will go into damage control mode. They'll try to discredit both of us." Catherine found herself laughing, a sound that surprised her with its lightness. "Emma, I've been living in damage control mode for 8 months. I'm ready to try something different." They arranged to meet at Anmer Hall, the Norfolk estate where Catherine and William had spent their early married years and where their children had taken their first steps. It felt appropriate somehow, starting this new chapter in the place where so much of their real life had unfolded away from the cameras. As soon as she ended the call, Catherine knew she had to tell William. She found him in the kitchen, helping Louis with his breakfast while simultaneously reviewing briefing papers for his upcoming engagements. This was William at his best, father and future king seamlessly blended, managing both roles with the ease of long practice. "I need to tell you something," she said, settling into the chair beside him. William looked up from Louis's cereal bowl, immediately reading the seriousness in her tone. Over 15 years together, they had developed an almost telepathic communication system, essential for navigating public life while protecting their private thoughts. "The children," he said, glancing meaningfully toward Louis, who was more interested in building towers with his Cheerios than listening to adult conversation. Later, Catherine agreed. "But, William, I've made a decision about the interview situation." His face went very still, the careful blankness that appeared whenever palace politics intruded on their family time. "What kind of decision?" "The kind that changes everything." That afternoon, while the children were at school and the staff had been given the day off, Catherine sat across from Emma Morrison in the sitting room that had witnessed countless family moments. No cameras, no recording equipment, just two women, a pot of tea, and a conversation that would reshape how the world understood the modern monarchy. Emma had arrived expecting to negotiate terms, to discuss what topics would be off-limits, to work within the usual royal interview framework. Instead, Catherine handed her a handwritten letter, the same pages she had filled in the early morning hours. "This is what I want to say," Catherine told her. "Not all of it in one interview, but this is the story I want to tell. The real one." Emma read in silence, her expression shifting from professional interest to genuine surprise to something approaching awe. When she finished, she set the pages down carefully, as if they might disappear. "Catherine," she said, using the first name deliberately, "this isn't just breaking protocol. This is breaking new ground entirely. Are you absolutely certain you want to go this far?" Catherine poured herself another cup of tea, her hands steady despite the magnitude of what she was proposing. "Emma, do you know what the hardest part of the last 8 months has been? It wasn't the surgery, or the recovery, or even the speculation. It was watching my children learn to lie." She paused, looking out at the garden where George's football still lay abandoned from the previous weekend. "Charlotte came home from school last week and told me about a conversation she'd had with her friends. They were asking about all the stories they'd seen online, all the theories about why Mummy was gone for so long. And my 9-year-old daughter looked me in the eye and said, 'I told them you were just resting, like we're supposed to say.'" Emma waited, understanding that this was the heart of it. She's 9 years old, and she already knows that our family's truth isn't allowed to be the public truth. That's not the legacy I want to leave her. That's not the example I want to set for any of the children watching us. They talked for 3 hours, crafting not just an interview strategy but a complete reimagining of how a senior royal could engage with the public. Catherine's vision was radical in its simplicity. What if they simply told the truth? Not the sanitized, palace-approved version of truth, but the messy, complicated, human reality of trying to serve the public while raising a family and maintaining some semblance of personal authenticity. The interview itself would be conducted in stages. The first part would address the immediate speculation, her health, her absence, her recovery. But it wouldn't stop there. The second part would delve into the broader questions about royal life, about the cost of duty, about the impossible balancing act of being both a public servant and a private person. Most controversially, the third part would outline her vision for a new kind of royal role, one that embraced transparency over mystique, connection over distance, and genuine service over ceremonial obligation. "The palace will hate this," Emma warned as they wrapped up their planning session. Catherine nodded. "The palace hates most things that they can't control. But I've realized something important. I don't work for the palace. I work for the people. And the people deserve better than what we've been giving them." That evening, as the family gathered for dinner, Catherine felt lighter than she had in months. William had spent the afternoon in crisis management mode, fielding calls from palace officials who had somehow gotten wind of unusual activity.
The royal protection officers were asking questions about unauthorized visitors. The communications team was requesting meetings. The carefully orchestrated machine of royal life was detecting disruptions to its usual rhythm. "So," William said, cutting into his chicken with perhaps more force than necessary, "I've had 12 calls this afternoon."
12. From people who seem to think you're about to declare war on the monarchy.
Catherine looked at her children, who were listening with the casual interest of young people who had grown up with adult conversations that often involved terms like constitutional crisis and damage control. "Not war," she said carefully.
"Revolution. There's a difference."
George, who had inherited both his father's sense of duty and his mother's sharp wit, looked up from his vegetables.
"What kind of revolution, Mum?"
Catherine reached across the table to squeeze his hand. "The kind where we remember that serving the people means being honest with them, even when it's difficult." Charlotte, ever the pragmatist, frowned.
"But what if they don't like what we have to say?"
It was the question at the heart of everything.
What if honesty cost them the very support that justified their existence? What if transparency undermined the mystique that had sustained the monarchy for over 1,000 years? What if being human made them seem less royal?
"Then, we'll deal with that," Catherine said.
"But, sweetheart, what if they do like it? What if treating them like intelligent adults who deserve the truth actually makes them trust us more?"
William was quiet through the rest of dinner, but Catherine could see him processing, calculating, weighing duty against innovation. After the children were in bed, he found her in their bedroom, staring out at the garden where they had played as a young family, back when their biggest worry was keeping Louis from eating dirt. "You know there's no going back from this," he said, settling beside her on the window seat they had installed specifically for quiet conversations away from listening walls.
"I know.
You know they'll try to make you look unstable, attention-seeking, ungrateful for everything you've been given.
I know.
You know this could change everything about how we do this job, how our children do this job, how the entire institution functions." Catherine turned to face him, seeing not the future king but the man who had loved her through 15 years of extraordinary circumstances.
"I know," she said. "And, William? That's exactly why I have to do it." He was quiet for a long moment, then pulled her against his side with the easy intimacy of a couple who had weathered storms together. "All right then," he said. "Let's change everything."
The next morning brought a flurry of activity. Palace officials arrived in a convoy of black cars, their faces grave with the weight of constitutional crisis. The senior private secretary, a man who had served 3 monarchs and thought he had seen every possible royal emergency, sat in their drawing room looking like he had aged a decade overnight. "Ma'am," he began, his voice carefully controlled, "we understand you've been in contact with members of the press without going through proper channels." Catherine, dressed in jeans and a simple sweater, a deliberate choice that signaled her intention to speak as a person rather than a princess, smiled politely.
"I'd been in contact with a journalist, yes. We're planning an interview." The silence that followed could have been cut with a knife. Then, all at once, everyone began talking about precedent, about protocol, about the dangers of unscripted public statements.
Catherine listened patiently, recognizing the language of an institution trying to protect itself from change. When they finished, she stood up, straightening to her full height. "Gentlemen," she said, "I appreciate your concerns.
I understand your fears.
But I'm going to do this interview, and I'm going to tell my story in my own words. You can work with me to make this as smooth as possible, or you can work against me and deal with the chaos.
But you cannot stop me." The senior aide blinked, clearly unused to such direct defiance from a royal family member.
"Ma'am, with respect, that's not how things are done." Catherine walked to the window, looking out at the reporters who had taken up permanent residence beyond the gates, their long lenses trained hopefully on any sign of activity.
"No," she agreed.
"It's not how things are done.
But maybe it's time we started doing things differently."
The interview aired on a Thursday evening in November, exactly 6 months after Catherine's last official public appearance. Emma Morrison had chosen to broadcast it live, despite the obvious risks, because both women understood that the power of the moment lay in its immediacy: no editing, no second chances, no palace interference. Catherine arrived at the television studio wearing a navy blue dress that she had chosen specifically because it was the same one she had worn to her first official engagement after her wedding. The symbolism was intentional, a callback to the hopeful young woman who had entered royal life with dreams of making a difference, now evolved into someone determined to redefine what the difference could look like. The green light went on at 8 o'clock sharp. Emma's introduction was brief, setting the scene without hyperbole, allowing the significance of the moment to speak for itself. Then, the cameras found Catherine, sitting in a simple chair with her hands folded calmly in her lap, looking directly into the lens with an expression of quiet determination.
"Your Royal Highness," Emma began, then paused. "Actually, may I call you Catherine tonight?"
It was a small question with enormous implications, and Catherine's smile in response carried the weight of revolution.
"Please do."
For the next 90 minutes, Catherine dismantled 15 years of careful image construction with the precision of a surgeon and the grace of a woman who had finally found her voice. She spoke about the surgery first, addressing the speculation head-on with a clarity that was both refreshing and shocking in its directness.
"Yes, it was serious," she said.
"More serious than we initially let on, because the palace believed that details about my health were private matters that didn't concern the public. But I've realized that when your life is funded by taxpayers, when your role exists to serve the people, privacy becomes a luxury you might not be entitled to." She talked about the fear not just of the medical procedure, but of what it meant to face mortality while living a life that had been constructed around the illusion of permanence and perfection. She spoke about lying in the hospital bed, sedated and vulnerable, while knowing that photographers were stationed outside, waiting for any glimpse that might become front-page news.
"I realized that I had become more afraid of being seen as human than I was of actually being human," she said. "And that's when I knew something fundamental had to change." Emma leaned forward slightly, recognizing the transition from personal revelation to broader critique. What needed to change? Catherine's answer would be quoted for decades to come. Everything.
The way we communicate with the people we serve.
The way we balance duty with authenticity.
The way we prepare our children for lives that demand they be symbols before they're allowed to be people. The entire relationship between the monarchy and the public that supports it.
She talked about her children with a fierceness that surprised even Emma.
Catherine described watching George, at 10 years old, already learning to speak in the careful, non-committal phrases that royal life demanded. She spoke about Charlotte's sharp questions about why they had to pretend everything was always perfect, why they couldn't just be honest about difficulties and challenges. "My daughter asked me something that I couldn't get out of my head," Catherine said, her voice softening.
She said, "Mum, if we're supposed to help people, why can't we tell them when we need help too?" And I realized she was right. How can we ask the public to trust us with their problems if we won't trust them with ours? The most explosive moment came when Emma asked about the palace's reaction to the decision to give this interview.
Catherine's laugh was rueful, tinged with frustration but free of bitterness.
"Let's just say that an institution that has survived for over 1,000 years doesn't embrace change easily.
There were threats, not physical ones, but professional ones. There were attempts to discredit my mental state, to suggest that stress had made me unstable. There were meetings about how to manage the damage I might cause." She paused, choosing her words carefully but without the usual diplomatic hedging.
"What they didn't understand is that I wasn't trying to damage the monarchy. I was trying to save it.
Because an institution that can't evolve, that can't be honest with the people it serves, won't survive another generation of increasing transparency and public scrutiny." The interview's most poignant moment came near the end, when Emma asked about the personal cost of choosing authenticity over protocol. Catherine was quiet for a long moment, her composure flickering for the first time. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of 15 years of careful compromise between her private self and her public role. "The hardest part isn't the criticism or the backlash or even the institutional pushback," she said.
"The hardest part is mourning the version of this life that I thought I wanted.
The fairy tale version where everything is beautiful and everyone is always happy and nothing real is ever allowed to intrude on the perfect picture." She looked directly into the camera, speaking not to Emma but to the millions of people watching.
"But fairy tales aren't real, and I've learned that real is better." Messier, more complicated, sometimes more painful, but better. Because real allows for connection, and connection is what service is actually about. Emma's final question was simple but profound: what happens now? Catherine's answer outlined a vision that was radical in its simplicity. She wanted to maintain her royal duties but transform how they were conducted. Instead of carefully choreographed appearances with scripted interactions, she proposed regular, informal meetings with the public. Instead of speaking only about approved charitable causes, she wanted to address real issues affecting real people, even when those issues were politically sensitive or personally challenging. Most significantly, she wanted to model a different kind of royal life for her children, one that honored duty while preserving humanity, that served the public without sacrificing authenticity. I want George, Charlotte, and Louis to see that you can be devoted to serving something bigger than yourself without losing yourself in the process, she said. I want them to learn that leadership means being willing to be vulnerable, that strength comes from honesty, not from pretending you're invincible. The broadcast ended with Catherine sitting quietly, her hands still folded, looking directly into the camera with an expression of calm determination. No dramatic music, no sweeping shots of royal residences, just a woman who had chosen to tell her truth and was prepared to live with the consequences. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Social media erupted with commentary ranging from admiration to outrage. Traditional media scrambled to provide analysis of what many called the most significant royal interview since Diana's famous BBC appearance. Palace officials went into full crisis mode, issuing carefully worded statements that managed to say nothing while sounding deeply concerned. But the most telling response came from the public itself. Within hours, #RealRoyalty was trending globally, filled not with criticism but with gratitude. People shared their own stories of struggling to balance authenticity with expectation, of feeling trapped by institutions that demanded perfection. Parents talked about wanting to raise children who could be honest about their struggles. Healthcare workers praised Catherine's openness about medical vulnerability. The letters that poured into Kensington Palace in the days following the interview were unlike anything the Royal Correspondence Office had ever processed. Instead of the usual formal expressions of support or criticism, these were personal testimonials from people who felt, for the first time, that they could relate to a member of the royal family. A week after the interview, Catherine made her first public appearance since the broadcast. She had chosen to visit a mental health facility in East London, a deliberately low-key engagement that allowed for genuine interaction rather than ceremonial ribbon-cutting. The crowds that gathered were different too, less formal, more emotionally engaged, filled with people who wanted to express gratitude rather than just catch a glimpse of royalty. William, who had spent the week fielding calls from family members, government officials, and palace courtiers, watched from the sidelines as his wife worked the crowd. She moved differently now, with the relaxed confidence of someone who no longer had to maintain a perfect facade. She listened to difficult stories without deflecting them. She answered challenging questions without hiding behind diplomatic non-answers. That evening, as they put the children to bed, Charlotte looked up from her bedtime story and asked, "Mom, are people angry about your interview?" Catherine considered the question seriously, as she had learned to do with all her children's inquiries about their unusual life. "Some people are upset because they prefer things to stay the same," she said. "But lots of people are happy because they feel like we're finally being honest with them." George, who had been quietly listening from his own bed, spoke up. "Are you going to keep being honest?" It was, Catherine realized, the most important question anyone had asked her in years. She looked at her eldest son, this boy who would someday face the same impossible balance between duty and authenticity, and made a promise that would shape the rest of their lives. "Yes," she said. "Even when it's hard. Even when people don't like it. Even when it would be easier to go back to pretending. Because you three deserve parents who model courage, and the people we serve deserve leaders who tell them the truth." As winter settled over Britain, the royal family settled into a new rhythm. There were still official engagements and ceremonial duties, but they were conducted with a transparency that felt revolutionary. Catherine's monthly honest conversations became appointment viewing for millions of people who had never paid attention to royal activities before. Her willingness to discuss real issues, from postpartum depression to financial anxiety to the challenges of raising children in the public eye, transformed the royal family from distant symbols into relatable human beings. The changes weren't without cost. Several senior palace officials resigned, unable to adapt to the new approach. Some traditionalists accused Catherine of cheapening the monarchy, of destroying the mystique that had sustained it for centuries. Foreign dignitaries had to adjust to meeting royals who spoke freely rather than in diplomatic code. But the benefits were undeniable. Public support for the monarchy reached heights not seen since the early years of Elizabeth II's reign. Young people, who had largely dismissed the royal family as an irrelevant relic, began engaging with royal causes and initiatives. The Commonwealth countries, many of which had been drifting toward republicanism, renewed their connections to the crown. Most importantly, the Wales children were growing up with a different understanding of service and leadership. They learned that strength came not from perfection but from the courage to be vulnerable. They discovered that real connection required real honesty, even when that honesty was uncomfortable. On the first anniversary of the interview that changed everything, Catherine stood in the same television studio, this time for a follow-up conversation with Emma Morrison. She looked different, more relaxed, more confident, more genuinely happy than she had in years.
"Any regrets?" Emma asked.
Catherine smiled, the expression reaching her eyes in a way that palace photographers had never quite captured before.
"Only one," she said. "I regret waiting so long to find my voice. But I suppose some discoveries can only happen when you're ready for them."
Outside the studio, the world had changed in ways both subtle and profound. The monarchy remained, but it had evolved into something more honest, more connected, more genuinely relevant to the lives of ordinary people. Catherine had broken her silence and, in doing so, had broken through to something entirely new, a royal family that served not by maintaining distance but by embracing the messy, complicated, beautiful reality of being human in service to others.